So fellas, it seems like not every month, but every week there's new news about Conor McGregor being up to no good, whether it's him spitting in people's faces or being at random events. McGregor's downfall at this point genuinely needs to be studied. Like, this guy went from being the simultaneous double champion of the world, the biggest star in combat sports, to now being some fat bloke who rambles on Twitter all day and starts calling people out on Twitter, but he hasn't fought in the octagon since 2021. And I feel like if we look back to the highs of Conor McGregor, and I'm talking about career highs, this guy, whether you love him or hate him, obviously was the biggest star in MMA history. 10 of the biggest selling pay-per-views in the UFC, he featured in 8 of them. He was talent, entertainment, and passion personified into one person. Like, from his UFC debut, the skill that he had and the octagon skills, he was piecing people up, knocking people out, finishing everyone, running through everybody. And he was on an absolute tear in the featherweight division, whilst also having the personality, also having the entertainment to build up fights, also having the charisma. And then obviously got that interim fight with Chad Mendes, trash-talked the hell out of Chad Mendes, ended up finishing him. Then he got the big fight with Jose Aldo, which was impressive because Aldo at the time was unstoppable. No one really thought McGregor was going to beat Aldo in the way that he did, because it was this tear that made Aldo still to this day one of the greatest featherweights of all time. He got in Aldo's head better than we've ever seen before. Probably did a better job of getting in someone's head than we've ever seen in MMA history. Ended up knocking him out in 13 seconds, making history, becoming the featherweight champion of the world. Then he goes up to the welterweight division, has those 2 fights with Nate Diaz, some of the biggest fights in the sport. Comes back down to the lightweight division, fights for a belt, absolutely styles on Eddie Alvarez, and becomes the first simultaneous double champion in UFC history. And at this point in McGregor's career, he had ended the reign of Jose Aldo, who looked like he was unstoppable in the featherweight division. He became the first simultaneous double champion in UFC history, and he becomes pound for pound number 1. Beat Diaz in the welterweight division, beat Eddie Alvarez in the lightweight division, beat Jose Aldo in the featherweight division. He was at the absolute peak of his career. He wasn't getting any better from here. Double champion of the world, massive megastar, and his in-octagon skills were the best he've ever been. And after this, it's where it all came crashing down, the downfall of Conor McGregor. It all started with the Floyd Mayweather fight, in my opinion. Now, he made more money than he's ever made before in this Floyd Mayweather fight. It was an absolutely huge fight with a massive build-up. Came over to boxing, had a boxing match with Floyd Mayweather, and inevitably ended up getting finished by Floyd Mayweather, but it was still one of the biggest grossing pay-per-view selling, or one of the highest selling pay-per-views we've ever seen in boxing history. But I feel like this was a bit of a curse in disguise for Conor McGregor, because he was never the same after this fight. They say it's hard to get up at 5 a.m. when you're sleeping silk pajamas, and this is kind of the example for Conor McGregor, because in his entire career, he's always working up to something bigger. From Chad Mendes to Jose Aldo to winning a second belt against Eddie Alvarez, then finally getting the big fight against Floyd Mayweather. But after this, he was never really getting back to his normal ways. I mean, a lot of people say that this heavy boxing training actually affected his in-octagon performance, and then after this, obviously, fought Khabib in the biggest fight in MMA history, but it wasn't the same McGregor as before. He wasn't the same passionate McGregor. He seemed like a raging alcoholic when he was fighting Khabib. Seemed like he was on a completely different mindset, and not in a good way, you know, throwing dollies into buses, fights Khabib, pulls up a decent performance at the beginning, but eventually gets mauled, submitted by Khabib in the biggest submission in UFC history, and even then that made it worse, because the Khabib loss only made it a lot worse. It only added fuel to the fire. He's punching old men in bars. He's smashing people's fans' phones. He's getting all these criminal cases that he's having to deal with. Eventually comes back after a few years, faces Donald Cerrone, runs through Donald Cerrone, but it wasn't that impressive considering that Cerrone was on a 2-fight finishing streak. And even after the McGregor fight, he was never to win a fight again. So it isn't like a super impressive win for Conor McGregor. Gets a rematch against the guy he's beaten before in Dustin Poirier. And then we see this kind of random nice Conor McGregor come out of nowhere. The first time we've really ever seen Mr. Nice Guy with Conor McGregor. It's kind of like the next counterpart of him. He shows up super respectful, ends up getting knocked out, and suffers his first knockout loss in MMA history, so obviously did him no favours. But even this can go back to the mindset, because some people thought he was looking past Dustin Poirier to get a boxing fight with Manny Pacquiao, and it kind of showed in the fight, because he had this heavy boxing approach, this heavy boxing stance, which didn't suit him in the fight, and he had this very different style to what he normally has, where he's usually light on his feet, and he came in with a heavy boxing approach in this fight. Eventually gets the trilogy with Dustin Poirier, and he's back to his kind of villainous ways, his evil Conor McGregor ways, but it wasn't even like he was the same old guy when it came to trash talking. Dustin Poirier were getting the better of him in the press conferences, and it seemed like McGregor was just massively trying to force this heel kind of character. Snaps his leg against Dustin Poirier, has an embarrassing octagon interview. Fast forward to 2025. And the guy's in a complete state, the worst state he's ever been in. He's probably 200 pounds. He looks massive nowadays. He's fat as fuck. He's probably 200 pounds. I don't think he's going to fight again. He was obviously scheduled to fight Chandler last year, which got cancelled because he ended up breaking his pinky toe. So the entire fight and the entire comeback got cancelled. And he's only won 2 times since 2016. If you take away the Don Cerrone loss, you've got to go all the way back to 2016 to find a time when Conor McGregor won it. And he's all the way back when he fought Eddie Alvarez. He's dealing with these court cases where he's having these allegations made against his name, which is only going to keep him out the octagon longer and only going to ruin his reputation even more. He's hanging around with the likes of Jake Paul and Logan Paul, guys who he'd threatened on Twitter, and then in real life he looks like he's buddy-buddy with all of them, which is kind of embarrassing when you've stooped to their level. Even Proper 12, which is like McGregor's biggest brand, what everybody knows what everyone knows Proper 12 for is Conor McGregor. Even Proper 12 has ended up dropping Conor McGregor because of these cases, and it's even worse on Twitter. If that's not bad enough, you look at his rambles on Twitter, how he's still making these massive rants about Khabib on Twitter. Even fellow Irish fighters like Paul Hughes, who had a close fight with Usman Nurmagomedov, ended up saying he doesn't want to be like Conor McGregor, and you've got Conor McGregor kind of disowning Paul Hughes from Ireland, calling him all these names, basically just disrespecting Paul Hughes. And then there's that other boxer from Ireland who converted to Islam, and you've got McGregor commenting on his post calling him a carpet licker. Even the likes of Michael Bisping and Joe Rogan and DC have all been targeted by Conor McGregor. Even Tom Aspinall has received shots. It seems like anybody who kind of slightly criticizes McGregor nowadays is going to get some full force attack on Twitter. He's shown up to late and overweight in BKFC press conferences. Recently, in the past week, he's come up that he spit on some random guy because they mentioned Khabib's name, which just shows how fragile, McGregor's mental state currently is. And if he's not doing that, he's out partying somewhere. And listen, I'm not saying he can't enjoy retirement. Listen, if you want to enjoy retirement, you got to do that. Maybe McGregor, he could have had a couple of fights where he realized he's not meant to be Octagon anymore. He could have hung the gloves up and enjoyed retirement. But instead, he's gone from being this double champion, pound for pound #1, this passionate, inspiring guy who's locked in, a megastar in combat sports. And he's ended up as this guy with a trashy lifestyle, trashy health, lives on Twitter all day. Like, he's genuinely posting like 10 to 20 tweets per day, and he's a complete mess and a shell of what he used to be. Now, this is how I would say McGregor comeback is possible if you were to possibly do it. If I was to give you a formula of how to kind of make a little bit of a McGregor comeback, this would be it. The first thing is he needs to sort out the mindset before anything. Before even trying to book a fight, you need to sort the mindset out. This lifestyle, this trashy lifestyle where he's overweight, partying, coked off his head, and he's obviously not in the right mental state. He needs to get rid of it. He needs to get rid of the alcohol, the drugs. He needs to stop going on Twitter as well, and just in general. He needs to get his life back on track. You look back to the old Conor McGregor, how focused he was, how locked in he was, and how just forward-minded he was. And nowadays, the guy's just in a complete mess. Doesn't look like he's able to form a sentence in these interviews. Doesn't really know what he wants in his life. Even in the BKFC press conferences, looks like he's off his head. He needs to get back to training, whether it's with his old gym. He needs to get back to his training ways, and he needs to sort out the mindset before he thinks about doing anything. And I genuinely think he needs to take a break from Twitter more than anything. 2 is to get back to training. If he is going to come back to the UFC, he needs to really question why he's coming back, because he's had one training camp in the last 4 years, and that was a short training camp against Michael Chandler. He's been inactive for 4 years too. He got knocked out and broke his leg in 2021. 2022 is him recovering and partying. 2023 was all partying. 2024, apart from that short training camp against Michael Chandler, was just partying too. He's been recovering from this leg injury. He's been all over the place. He's not been in the octagon. So does he actually want to fight? Because he's not this young, hungry guy who needs to fight anymore. He's got everything he wants. He's hungover. He's got all the money in the world. He doesn't need to fight. He doesn't have a passion for fighting anymore. There's no passion left. So if he does come back to a disciplined training camp, maybe with his old coaches, and he maybe sorts his lifestyle out, I think this obviously can go hand in hand and improve his mental state. But he needs to get back to a training camp before he even thinks about booking a certain opponent, because like I said before, the guy's huge. He's not fight ready right now. He needs to get back into shape, back into fighting shape if he even wants to look competitive in the UFC in 2025 or whenever he fights. So he needs to get back to training. And 3, if we're talking in terms of opponents, he needs to fight someone winnable with a big name, like the Donald Cerrone fight. When he fought Donald Cerrone, I think this was the perfect opponent for Conor McGregor, because it was a big name in the MMA space, but it was also very winnable because, it was the 7th biggest pay-per-view in MMA history, or UFC history, so people were interested. And Conor McGregor also ran through Donald Cerrone because it was an easy fight. So the 2025 equivalent of this, assuming there's going to be fighting at 170, because he's never even touching 155 again, I think a potential opponent could be Nate Diaz. They're 1-1 against each other. They've had 2 huge fights. It's this big rivalry that they still still kind of go at each other every now and then on Twitter, so it's kind of still continuing. Nate Diaz is a massive star, one of the biggest in UFC history, but he hasn't really been performing well the last couple of times we've seen him in the octagon. So maybe Nate Diaz is a potential opponent for Conor McGregor. Maybe even like a Paddy Pimblett at this point could be a potential opponent, because Paddy Pimblett, we've all seen him out of fight camp, weighs in about 230 pounds. He can easily make 170 without a doubt. He's also kind of dangerous nowadays, is Pimblett. I know he used to be memed on because of his skill, but he's got really good grappling, really good jiu-jitsu, brutalized Bobby Green, but he's also somewhat winnable for Conor McGregor because of the lack of defense that Paddy Pimblett has on the feet and the fact that he's so inexperienced against high competition in the UFC. So it's a big name as well. Pimblett's a huge name, whether you like him or you hate him. He's got more followers than half of the current male champions in the UFC, and he's a massive star. Paddy Pimblett could easily like sell out an auto arena by himself in the main event. He's a massive star. I'd say he's probably bigger than Donald Cerrone worldwide as of right now. So Paddy Pimblett's another winnable, I guess a somewhat winnable fight. That's also a massive name for Conor McGregor. Also Kevin Holland. Kevin Holland's also washed. He's won one of his last 5. He doesn't really care about winning anymore. He's still a kind of dangerous striker though, and you could put him against McGregor, who's a dangerous striker. He can also sell a fight when he wants to, and obviously McGregor can also sell a fight. So maybe even like a Kevin Holland in the welterweight division could be a comeback fight for Conor McGregor, but I think he's got to fight someone winnable with a bigger name. And if he was to do that, whether he wins or whether he loses, I think he'd be in a much better spot than him just being drunk and coked out, sat on Twitter all day. Even if he was to lose in an embarrassing fashion, it would have got him back in the gym. It would have got him in a better mental state. So that's how I think a McGregor comeback is possible. But listen, let's be realistic. He's never going to be a champion again. He's never even going to be in the top 5 again if we're being realistic. So that's how I think some sort of McGregor comeback could be possible. But I'm just here to highlight the downfall of Conor McGregor. From being inspiring, the biggest star in combat sports, to what he's been doing recently, where it seems like every single week there's this new kind of news out about Conor McGregor, and it's never something positive or never something good. So that's my thoughts on this situation. Let me know your thoughts. Thank you for watching.